I stood in the kitchen of the home Elena and I had built together over the course of a decade, watching the steam rise from a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The house, usually a sanctuary of warmth and shared history, now felt like a hollow shell, its walls echoing with the weight of a silence that had become our only constant. For 12 years, I believed we were the exception to every rule about failing marriages. We were the couple that friends looked to for advice, the ones who seemed to navigate the complexities of life with an effortless grace. But as I stared out the window at the gray morning light, I realized I had been blind to the subtle erosion of our foundation. Looking back, I can see the shift in the wind long before the storm hit. It began with the small things, a lingering gaze at the window, a phone that was suddenly never left unattended, and a shift in her energy that felt like a door being quietly locked from the inside. Elena had begun to treat our life like a series of obligations to be managed rather than a partnership to be cherished. I felt the growing distance, a chasm of cold air between us even when we shared the same bed, but I chose to label it as stress. I convinced myself that her career was demanding more of her, that the strategy sessions and late-night edits were merely the price of her success. I poured myself into my own work and the meticulous maintenance of our home, thinking that by providing a perfect, stable harbor, I would eventually draw her back to me. I never realized that while I was shoring up the walls and planning our future, Elena was already halfway out the door, searching for a different kind of light in a world I didn't know existed. The revelation did not come with a grand, cinematic explosion, but through a careless slip of technology on a mundane, rainy Tuesday evening. It was a night like any other, the smell of rain on the pavement, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of the shower running upstairs. Elena had rushed into the bathroom, leaving her phone face up on the nightstand for the first time in months. When the screen lit up with a notification, I didn't intend to snoop. I was simply reaching for my book, but the preview text was so long and so intimate that it stopped my heart. It was a message from a man named Mark. The words were not those of a colleague or a casual friend. They were filled with a raw, desperate longing and references to a hotel room they had shared just nights before. Driven by a sickening, cold instinct, I picked up the device. My fingers trembled as I entered our wedding anniversary as the passcode, a cruel irony that worked instantly. Inside, I found a meticulously hidden digital life. There were thousands of messages stretching back 8 months, photos of Elena laughing in cities I didn't know she'd visited, and shared secrets that belonged to a version of her I thought was mine alone. I found myself scrolling through a timeline of betrayal that ran parallel to our life. While I was celebrating our anniversary or planning our garden, she was sharing her deepest thoughts and her body with Mark, standing there in our bedroom, surrounded by the furniture we had picked out together and the familiar scent of her expensive lavender perfume. I felt my entire identity dissolve. The woman singing a light melody behind the bathroom door was a total stranger, and the 12 years of history held were nothing more than a carefully maintained facade. When Elena finally emerged from the bathroom, wrapped in a plush robe and glowing from the steam, the confrontation was a hollow, haunting affair. I didn't scream or throw things. I simply sat on the edge of the bed and held her phone out in the dim light. The sight of her face collapsing was more telling than any confession could have been. The color drained from her skin, leaving her looking fragile and small, but I felt no urge to comfort her. She sat down across from me, the silence between us so heavy it felt like it might crush the floorboards. Then came the excuses, tumbling out like jagged glass. She spoke of a profound loneliness that I hadn't noticed, of feeling invisible in the shadow of our routine, and of seeking a spark that she claimed I had let die. Elena tried to frame her betrayal as a symptom of my focus on our future, as if my dedication to our mortgage, our stability, and our long-term security had somehow forced her into Mark's arms. It was a classic displacement of guilt, an attempt to make me a co-author of her infidelity. Hearing her voice attempt to justify months of calculated lies only deepened the chasm. Every explanation she offered felt like a new insult to the life I had worked so hard to build. She talked about how Mark made her feel alive and seen, while I was busy being the provider, The cruelty of her logic was breathtaking. She had used the safety I provided as a platform from which to jump into another man's life. In the aftermath of that night, I entered a season of emotional devastation that I can only describe as a waking death. The anger was not a quick fire, but a constant, low-grade fever that lived in my marrow, occasionally spiking into a blind, white-hot rage that made me want to tear the house apart. I found myself trapped in a cycle of obsessive, intrusive thoughts. I became a detective of my own misery, mentally retracing every late night at the office, every girl's weekend, and every time she had been too tired for me. I mapped out the geography of her lies, finding the hidden footprints of her affair in every memory of the past year. My self-worth became a casualty of her choices. I constantly compared myself to Mark, a man I had never met, but whose presence now haunted every corner of my mind. I wondered if he was more charismatic, if he listened better, or if he simply provided the novelty that I, as a husband of 12 years, could no longer offer. The grief was an exhausting, physical weight, a heavy fog that followed me from room to room. I would wake up in the guest room and for a few seconds forget, only for the reality to hit me like a physical blow to the stomach. The house became a museum of what we had lost, and every object, from the mugs in the cupboard to the rug in the hallway, served as a reminder of the woman who had traded our history for a few months of excitement. As the months dragged on, the raw, bleeding pain eventually gave way to a cold, clear-eyed clarity regarding our future. Elena began to plead for a second chance with a desperation that was painful to witness. She cut off all contact with Mark, offered to attend intensive therapy, and gave me total, unfettered access to her digital life. For a brief window of time, I considered it. I thought about the logistics of divorce, the lawyers, the selling of the house, the awkward explanations to our families, and for a moment, the path of least resistance seemed to be staying. But as I looked at her across the dinner table one evening, watching her try so hard to be the wife I once loved, I realized that trust is a fragile vessel. Once it is shattered, you can glue the pieces back together, but it will never hold water the same way again. I didn't want to spend the next 20 or 30 years as a warden in my own marriage. I didn't want to be the man who checked phone logs at midnight or felt a spike of panic every time she was 10 minutes late. I understood that for my own survival and sanity, I had to choose a future of uncertain peace over a present of guaranteed resentment. The decision to leave was not born of hate, but of a profound need for self-preservation. The resolution was a quiet, somber ending to our story, a clinical process of dividing our belongings, signing papers that reduced 12 years to a few paragraphs of legalese, and finally putting the house on the market. I stand now on the other side of that wreckage, living in a small apartment that smells only of my own life. I have learned that a person's decision to betray is never truly a reflection of the partner they left behind. It is a profound commentary on their own internal voids and their inability to navigate the complexities of long-term commitment. I have learned to value the silence of my new home, finding a sense of self that isn't tethered to Elena's validation or her honesty. The process of rebuilding has been slow and often lonely, but there is an undeniable strength in standing on your own defeat after the ground has been pulled out from under you. To anyone standing in the ruins of a similar betrayal, I would offer this: do not own the shame that belongs to someone else. The affair was her choice, her secret, and her failure. While the betrayal feels like a life sentence and, at the beginning, it is actually a painful invitation to reclaim a life that is no longer built on a foundation of sand. It is far better to walk alone in the harsh light of the truth than to run in circles within a beautiful, suffocating lie. I have learned that forgiveness is not about letting the other person off the hook, but about dropping the heavy weight of their sins so you can finally move forward. Today, the steam still rises from my coffee, but the silence no longer feels heavy. It feels like a clean slate, a chance to write a new chapter where the only person I have to trust is the man I see in the mirror.